Hello, everybody. Hi, we're starting. Yay. My name is Enid. I'm from the Writers Guild Foundation. Happy New Year, first of all. We decided to start this year off spicy, talking about writing about sex. It's going to be an awesome conversation. We're also co-hosting this event with the Stephens College MFA in screenwriting, television and screenwriting. Yay. It's one of our favorite partnerships, and this was all Rosanne Welch's idea, and she's moderating, so please welcome Dr. Rosanne Welch.
All right, how is everybody tonight? Woo! We have a full house. We're very excited. Yes, I'm here from the Stephens College MFA in TV and Screenwriting. We have a lovely book on women, When Women Wrote Hollywood, that we suggest if you don't know the famous women who came before us, we should all know their names and thank them because we stand on their shoulders. So we're very excited about that. All I have to say about the college is that we're a low residency program, and we're obviously doing MFAs in TV and Screenwriting. We work at the Henson Studios, which is a marvelous place to hang out. And I founded a class that is the history of screenwriting, not the history of film, because the history of film is the history of directors, and that's the history of great men. And I'm done with that. I'm ready to talk about great women. So tonight we have a panel of very great women with wonderful reviews in this town, and so I'm very excited they all said yes. We're also very happy that it's a particularly diverse panel. We really work for that in our program. Our program is about getting more female voices and underrepresented voices into our medium. So I'm just going to very briefly tell you who they are because you read their bios. That's why you bought tickets. You bought tickets for them, not for me. All right? So I'm going to start with Michelle Ashford, who comes to us. Of course, Masters of Sex. How could we not have Michelle Ashford on the program tonight? Come on up. Then we have Cindy Chupack, who's coming to us with two Emmys for writing on many wonderful shows, including Sex and the City, which brings her here tonight. Then we are super excited because the third panelist is actually an alumni of our program from 2 years ago, the class of 2018. She comes to us from Ramy and 13 Reasons Why, and it's Sahar Jahani. Woo! Then we have a friend of the program who came to us in our first semester and spoke to the students about a show that I adore greatly. It was on Lifetime a few years ago. Any day now, but of course she's also been on Insecure and Single Ladies in Lincoln Heights, and that's Dayna North. Yay! And finally, in the vein of women and working in Hollywood, we have a woman who was supposed to be with us at our last co-hosted event, which was about working mom writers, but she had to cancel at the last minute because childcare fell through. So it was truly an example of that. So we're super excited she was able to join us instead tonight. Coming to us from Vida is Gladys Rodriguez. Woo-hoo! All right, and I'm going to jump it off pretty quick with a question that I think will start us off. And I will tell a very short story while I have everyone on the panel think about the answer to this question. And then I will ask them all to answer this question. And the question simply is, what is the first sex scene that you remember seeing in a film or perhaps reading in a book when you were a younger person? And while they think about that, I will briefly tell you I'm an Italian American. And I was often babysat by my cousins Sal and Joey and Vito. And it can't get any more cliche than that. And the first sex scene I remember seeing when I was about 12 years old was Sonny in The Godfather banging the maid of honor up against the bathroom while it was his sister's wedding. And I didn't really know what they were doing, but it didn't look comfortable. And it was written by a couple of guys, Mario Puzo and Francis Ford Coppola. And that was my first introduction to, oh, that's what sex is like? It don't look like something I'm all that interested in doing. And for the rest of my life, I've pretty much seen sex scenes like that. I had a friend in Italy, cousin in Italy, because, I'm Italian, so I have a cousin. And she said to me, in Europe, in movies, they make love. In America, in movies, they have violent sex. We don't tend to make love. And I think that's really interesting. So, now they've had a moment. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Woohoo, thank you.
I think the first one I remember is actually the Blue Lagoon. Does anyone remember that?
Oh my God, yes.
I'm trying to think if I can think of anything before that, and what's actually kind of to me interesting about that is I remember because of course they're trapped on an island, spoiler alert, and just that it was the discovery. It actually felt, especially for back in that day, there was like a balance to at least what trying to think back to teenage me who had figured out how to like the notch. That was when like the cable button kind of slid down this little grid, and like I figured out how to like hijack, and get to the H whatever. And so, but just remembering that there was like it felt like both of them were discovering something kind of equally, as opposed, and so that I do, and I remember actually being fascinated by that sense of mutual discovery and what were they discovering, et cetera.
Ooh, very cool. Thank you. All right. Who else wants to go next?
I'll go next. I remember renting a movie called Kids, and I was probably around 11, and my mom let me watch it because it was called Kids. But if you know the sex scene, they're like two underage kids, like basically having sex, and I want to say like it was almost like a date rape or something scene, and it was really disturbing. And I was like, whoa! Like I may have been younger than 11 because I just remember being really disturbed. And then my mom walks in on me watching that, and she was like, I thought this was called Kids, and I thought it was a kids movie. But I just remember being like so shocked. And then it was just like, whoa. But it was a great movie. I mean, I remember just like being really into it and like being really into that like style and filmmaking. So yeah, that was one of the first that I remember.
Cool. All right.
I'm okay. My dad had porn, and I discovered it. So I actually had a very realistic or not realistic, I don't know, too realistic idea of what it was, and it was very disturbing. And then I feel like in films what I kept seeing, like in Harold and Maude, and it was funny because they did this in Isn't It Romantic, where it's just like it cuts. It's like they're going to bed and then cut to the morning after, and everyone's happy. So I knew there was like quite a lot missing.
That's perfect. Cool.
I have my memory, I think, is a collective memory that we can all share in, which was the sex scene from Titanic. And fun fact, I watched it in Iran, where films like that were and continue to be banned. But everyone, gets a copy of like films from on the streets. Like I think at the time somebody had a VHS, and so me and my family and this other family got together in the living room of their house, and we were watching the movie, which was like 2 hours long. And then I just remember the hand on the window, and then everyone freaked out. And of course, being in a conservative Muslim Iranian family, I don't know why they thought that movie was okay to watch like together.
You were cut off. It was a political act.
Yes, political act. Thank you.
Oh my God.
I'm being censored.
Oh no. He's got a new. No, we're well. I would say we're America. We're better than that, but I'll just say he's got a new one, so we're good.
Anyway, yeah. So we quickly fast forwarded through.
I think it's working. I think it's working okay. I don't know what happened. She was cut off.
I'm not saying anything special. Anyways, but that was my memory, my first sex scene.
Cool.
Mine is I was taken at a very early age to see Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Yes. And I remember, it's so funny now looking back on that scene because it left such an incredible impression when Robert Redford goes and Catherine Ross is in her room and he's got his gun and you think he's an intruder and he's going to hurt her and he says, take your clothes off. And she does, and then it turns out, of course, they're lovers, and it's all very sexy. And I remember thinking it was very sexy. And the teenage boys that were older than me that were watching it thought it was incredibly sexy. But it's so funny, that scene now. I mean, good luck trying to get that scene past anybody. Oh, was it not here? Oh, sorry. Anyway, so that's the one that I remember, and it's a perfect example of how things have changed greatly in terms of kind of what is considered okay and what is not considered okay.
That's true, because you're right. We all loved Robert Redford, and it was like how wonderful and.
It was very saucy, and it just. but he's got a gun trained on her, and he's telling her to strip. And anyway, it's interesting.
Wow. That's amazing. And it's very interesting because these are all such variety of scenes that have been provided. Only Dayna had one that was actually, it is mutual. Yeah. Because they were kids maybe, and so he wasn't dominant because he was almost in his own naive way.
Titanic's mutual. They were in love.
That's true.
Yeah.
I don't know. Right?
Yeah,
they were very much in love.
They were
It was
balanced.
very
Yeah.
mutual in the porn I watched. She might have
Well, shout out to
instigated.
that. What'd you say?
She might have instigated. I'm not sure.
Well, we did say it'd be spicy. Didn't we? Oh, that's too funny. Very cool. All right, now, I didn't have this written down, but you made me think, if we're talking about the first one, is there a really great one? And I guess Titanic counts, because that's beautiful. Can we think of a really great, well-orchestrated sex scene that we've seen and enjoyed? And I just made that up, so I don't have one off the top of my head. Really? I can't think.
Well, I was remembering like that. Was it the first Lethal Weapon when they were like showing off scars, and kind of trading? I just remember that. But just the third.
Third?
One of them. Third. I always enjoyed that. Thank you. That one. Just the vibe of, again, there was because that little bit of it. I wouldn't even call it. I was not even reversal, but finally starting to get a balance of like equal badassery, so to speak, and just that sense of like two people who are coming together around kind of, again, like how they present and their toughness and their this and that. I just remember finding that fun the first time I saw it and appreciating what was drawing them.
Very cool.
There's when we were doing Masters of Sex, we spent a lot of time thinking about what we were going to do about a show that was so much revolving around sex, which was a subject I was actually not thrilled about having to portray. So it was a lot of discussion, and we started to say to each other, well, where have we seen sex scenes that we thought were really, really interesting and about something very deep and went beyond just what I always found with most sex scenes is they feel like they're not a continuation of the narrative. They're just this weird thing to get everybody titillated, and I thought I'm so uninterested in that. And there's a movie called Don't Look Now. I don't know if you know what that movie is, but there's a sex scene between Julie Christie and Donald Sutherland that is truly extraordinary, and it is extraordinary because it's intercut with another part of their life, and so what you understand is the sex is infused with this great meaning about what they have gone through, what they mean to each other, who they are as a couple. And so it's this wonderful continuation, in fact, adds, of course, to the whole story of who are they, what are they about, what are they wrestling with. And so that was on the top of our list as a sex scene that actually is integral to the story. It's incredibly beautiful and interesting without being salacious. And I would still say it's at the top of really, really grown-up, sophisticated, and emotional sex scene.
I think I loved, of course, The Graduate, not going out on a limb here, but when he kisses her when she just took a drag of a cigarette and then he kisses her and she can't exhale the smoke till afterward, I think that was like one of the first times I saw comedy in a sex scene. And I think I'd be embarrassed to write a sex scene, not embarrassed, like I could do it, but I feel like almost every sex scene I've ever written has some comedic element, and that's the reason for the scene. And it is hard to make it not seem... unless it's like a rape or it's a story reason that way. It's like a challenge to make it not just an expression of they're in love and now they're having sex and it's romantic and so for me comedy cuts that. Yeah. So those are the scenes I like.
That's a great trip too for writers in general.
I just remembered, speaking of educational, and I don't know if this holds up now, but Boys Don't Cry. For me, that was educational because I was like, oh, this is about a woman who's transitioning to be a man, and he hasn't told his partner that he is in fact not biologically male, and so I think Tina is his female name, but and I can't remember what he would go by, but he had a dildo, and it was just so transformative for me to watch as a young person trying to tell a story about something we haven't seen before at the time. And and I don't think in the scene he reveals that he is not in fact male. So it's really interesting, and if you haven't watched it, you should check it out.
Very cool. Always good to have good scenes to study because scenes are their own.
Also Moonlight Kingdom, which I love, Wes Anderson, but it's just two young kids and they don't really have sex. I think they just sort of mess, but it's a very sweet and honest and interesting look at like because he sort of gets hard while they're dancing and she says like, oh, and he's like, do you mind? And it's just these very innocent, sweet things that you don't see written about or shown, and it's not uncomfortable because they are kids and they're discovering it. It's sweet.
Cool. And you made me remember. I do remember one I liked. Of course, it's an Italian film, Mediterraneo, which is about a bunch of soldiers who got trapped on an island during World War II, and they fall in love with the people on the island, and they actually make love. And you're like, and it actually doesn't hurt the narrative because you're watching them create these relationships. There you go. So there are some good ones. Yeah. Cool. All right. So here's a thought that struck me because we're all from different cultures, which is really interesting. So here's a question. Is there anything in your cultural background that made it difficult when you first had to write some sex scenes? So I'm Catholic, cafeteria Catholic, so I pick and choose. But I've written abortion clinic stuff and all those things, which I shouldn't know about or care about or whatever. And I have aunts who shouldn't watch some things I've written. But yeah, is there anything in your background that you sort of have to, it gets in the way or you push it aside so you can do the job properly?
I have the same problem. My mother was Italian and very Catholic, and she was not someone who would want to sit around and watch a sex scene. And so, yeah, that's always was sort of in the back of my mind, and I think it gave me a slight sort of prudishness about that stuff. So it was very interesting. I ended up tackling that subject matter in such a big and 4-year-long way. Yeah, that was definitely in the back of my mind. I think your parents have a lot to do with how you approach this material.
Well, and I think just having your parents alive is a difficult thing. It's like, because I did always think like, I remember when I was writing Sex and the City, my dad would say like, you don't actually experience everything you write about. And I was like, I don't even want to have this conversation with you. I've seen your porn.
Well, you have that in your back pocket at least.
Yeah. He doesn't know that. But I will say I also have written books of essays about dating, and so I always changed the guy's name, and I always made myself more culpable. I mean, I always try to take myself down. It's not about like these guys misbehaving. I mean, I wrote this book, the Between Boyfriends book, and so I was always worried about the guy seeing it, and they always find it. I don't know why I ever thought just because it's a girl's book, it's going to somehow fly under the radar. But so my key was try to take yourself down. You make yourself culpable. Change the name if you can. You can't like for modern love poems, but you can in books. And then be very complimentary about something like. The most handsome man I ever dated, who was terrible in bed or something. something to take the edge off.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I wrote on Vida, which is a Latinx queer show, and I every episode starts with like a sex scene, and so when I told my parents, you guys should watch this, they're Catholic, conservative Mexican parents. They were like shocked because like the first episode they see is like 5 minutes into the pilot, like the girls having sex on the stairs, and it's not a queer sex scene, but they were still shocked. And then they get to the second episode, and it's just like this girl's face sitting her partner or whatever, and so they were shocked. But I feel like and it's funny because. They're more shocked about this, but when I wrote on Sons of Anarchy too, which is, we had a whole season dedicated to the club had a porn studio. They were fine with that. It was just like, it's just because they're conservative and they're just not used to this. But yeah, it was a difficult one. But I think they're a little bit more open-minded. Like season 2, they came around. But yeah.
But isn't it funny? Men running a porn studio seemed normal. And so even if they didn't like it, it seemed acceptable versus...
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
I was one of the things that I appreciated about Insecure, for me personally, was that we would try to go right to like things that made us uncomfortable or things that just even in the room, you know, if we would start talking about something, whatever it might be, and whether it was around like, you know, I remember questions would come up, and if we noticed disagreement in the room or different experiences in the room, it would be like, oh, well, then we're definitely going to write about this, you know, or people being self-conscious about their quote unquote their number. And I remember being like, somebody's number is still a thing? Like, who's still counting? Like, I remember, you know, but coming back to specifically the question, it's like, for me, noticing where my areas of shame were, you know, and going, oh, that's an interesting thing to, like, again, try to go toward and pull out. Because remembering finding, you know, as you all were kind of speaking to, I found one of my mom's like romance novels when I was like 12 or 13, those ridiculously, you know, overly written, talking about mounds of flesh and all that kind of stuff. And I remember finding one of those, and then the way in which I got just the level of shame that I was made to feel. And it took me years to be like, that was your book, you know what I mean? Like, because there was so much stuff put on me for finding it, and she heard me talking to a girlfriend about it, and so just, you know, realizing it's fun to get in situations where I can kind of realize, oh wow, there's a lot of cultural shame that just gets, that we take on, and then trying to like take that off. So in the insecure room, it might be around whatever, like the different takes on blowjobs, and like, is that what element of that is cultural? What element of that is just in your individual experience? You know, and so we had fun trying to go right at that stuff, and all of us kind of around the table, kind of looking at like, oh yeah, what have I taken on, and what do I want to confront?
Cool. Well, I feel like this question is meant for me. No, I'm kidding. I think we all have. Not. No, I know, Rosanne. But that is like the bane of my existence, essentially, in a writer's room. No, I think because being so visibly Muslim, it's a double-edged sword in a lot of ways. So I worked on a show called Ramy season 1, which is about a Muslim guy who essentially his biggest vice is that he, you know, can't help but have sex with every girl he meets. So this is, you know, the first sort of show of its kind on like a big streaming platform. We are a room full of Muslims and non-Muslims, and I am essentially coming in with this, even me myself, like I, you know, believe that you shouldn't have sex before marriage. That was a thing that I personally felt for myself, and I'm coming into this show that I have to put my head in a space where the main character is a guy who doesn't believe the same thing, but we're of the same religion and we're of the same background. So that room was actually really, really transformative in my own life and my own perception of faith and the way I practice. But at the same time, being in a room with other Muslims, you think like, oh, they, you know, we can have a conversation about virginity and it'll be healthy. But the ironic thing was on the other end of it. When I would tell people, hey, I'm a virgin, like I had to come clean about that, because I'm not gonna lie and be like, I have so much sexual experience and let me make shit up. Actually, the women in the room, I felt like there was judgment on from their end, and they were non-Muslim women. We had a showrunner who was very experienced, and I love her to death. But I mean, the first time I said that, I think out loud, because I was like, this is a safe space. Like, we're talking about Muslims here. Everyone was like, that's not true. Like, that can't be possible. And it was the women who were like, for real, you can tell us. Like, and I was like, no, for real, like, this is a thing. I mean, there are people who are in their late 20s who decide not to have sex. Like, that is a choice. So it's so interesting, because that was the first room, and you know, then I went to a room called Undressed, which was an MTV show that they were trying to reboot. It was a show in the early 2000s. I think a lot of people might remember that show. Yeah. And in that room, my non-experience was actually an asset, because they wanted people who weren't, you know, necessarily going out every night on Tinder dates. Like, that's a lifestyle, and then, you know, my boring life was also a lifestyle. So they wanted that experience too, and I think I've learned to just like own who I am, and it's valuable to live your life a certain way, and you just have to like be honest with people about it and not be ashamed. So it's a whole thing. Yeah.
Oh, but you're brilliant. First of all, that is the best advice you can ever give anyone who wants to be a writer. You have to be yourself in the room.
Yeah, I mean, you can like try to make stuff up, but you know.
But that's a good point, though, because especially a room of a show where you're going to be writing about sex, it really has to feel safe, supportive, non-judgmental, if you want to get the best stories out of people, because you probably had some great stories you started to be like afraid to
I mean, really,
tell.
the sister episode in Ramy, I don't know if people here have watched it, but after I admitted to that, they were like, okay, well, that's a story we have to tell. We have to tell the story of like a 25, 26-year-old girl who's never had sex and lives at home with her family, and, you know, what if she wants to, and what does that look like? And that kind of ended up being the sister episode, so yes.
Because all the best stuff, and especially comedy, comes from like what you were talking about, where you admit what you're afraid to admit, and you know, like at Sex and the City, we used to put out, you know when this happens, and you're hoping everyone goes, yeah, but every once in a while, people are like, what?
Right. Come on, everybody. No, you didn't. Okay. Yeah, those
Never
moments.
mind. I just heard that. Yeah. But those, and we used to kind of assign stories based on what you were most uncomfortable with. I mean, that's where all the good stuff is, because there's the shame and nobody's talked about it and it's not out there. So you're into something good.
Right.
But if you're in a room where you get shut down, that's bad.
Then you miss that gold.
I think they were just surprised. I think it's just like of the times. But yeah, no, it's true. But you just, you talk about it and then you laugh about it later on, and people are like, I'm so sorry I reacted that way. Are you okay? And I was like, yes, we're all good.
But I am also glad that you mentioned, I think it is fascinating sometimes to see where people will assume, I'm so liberal, I'm so open, I'm so this, and then when you bump up against somebody's stuff, whatever that may be, like, women, where we can get into that thing of course, I'm creating a safe space, and then, no, you couldn't possibly be blah, blah, blah,
Yeah, and on the other end of that spectrum, me being like at the time, my mental space was very conservative. I'm very different now. But my episode was about, a Muslim woman who was married and she has sex with our main character, and that was a huge deal, and I was very, very opposed to her character having sex out of being having sex if she's married. But that's the thing, that's a character, and we really had to have a discussion of like, this person exists in the real world, whether we agree with her choices or not. I really just had to mentally put myself there and be like, of course there are women in our community who are having this need, and they make choices, and I just have to be okay with that. Whether like story-wise it made sense is another thing, but no, I mean it made sense because it led our character on his journey. So.
You have to be careful about that representation thing, where you're like, well, now are we saying that Muslim women, because there aren't a lot of Muslim shows, so you want to, but that is the enemy of.
I just think it has to be earned, right? Like that moment has to be earned. So we talked about other ways, like can they cuddle or can they kiss? But no, it had to be sex according to our showrunner. So I will go with that.
And the showrunner runs the show. If that's what they ask, it's our job as writers to make that happen. So that's also
as
very
writers' assistants, definitely.
Writers' assistants moving up the ladder there, saying, I can write that. Sure, I can.
I did want to say, well, I didn't realize we were such a feminist panel, but I'm in a room now that it's a mini room, as all rooms are, that's about non-monogamy. And we have an equal number, we have men, women, straight, young, old, gay, bi. It's like a really good room, and I love having men in the room, for when we're talking about this, because there is only so far you can go with a room full of women, like talking about blowjobs before you kind of want to go, okay.
Yeah, somebody. Yeah.
So it's kind of, I think that's really important in that kind of room, to have like a lot of people represented and be able to get both sides.
Oh yeah. Oh, I think people who didn't know that are learning that, and people who had really great shows knew that from the start and have always tried to provide all that perspective.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So let's think about this. Before there was cable, pay cable, blah, 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 there was a need to not show everything, because you couldn't in broadcast television. And so there's sometimes a discussion about how writers got a chance to be more creative when they couldn't go all the way and show you a full sex scene. They had to insinuate. So my question would be, do we think that the ability to show more has taken away any creativity or not?
feel like I'm talking too much.
No.
But I was on Everybody Loves Raymond at the time. I freelanced Sex and the City, so I was on this family show, and I went to do that. And they used to always tease me, like, so every episode's like the Staten Island Ferry, someone gets a blowjob, and then like as they kept reducing it to, they were joking, but they're like, of course, because you can use the language, you can show it. Like we're having a tougher time, and no, I loved that writing. Raymond too, but I think early on in cable it did sort of feel like people with their new toys and going a little cuckoo. I mean, no offense to Dream On, but I just remember thinking like, okay, now someone's gonna get naked. And it sort of felt like we get to do this, kind of a locker room titillation. But I think as it's evolved, it's gotten like you can be really deep and you just have to really examine why you're doing it, right?
I agree. I agree. I think now that the storytelling has also just evolved in television in so many ways. It, at least in my experience, spending a lot of time lately in streaming and on the blah 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 versions of distribution. It feels like we've gotten back to a place of just how is this going to move story, and that may be. I mean, without generalizing too much, I do think that again, I'll speak to my experience specifically on Insecure and things like that. We do try to look at, like, if we're writing this, what is this scene, what is this moment, whether it's a dinner scene or a sex scene, why is it moving, right? How is it moving story forward? And so I don't feel like we treat it any different. I mean, of course, we have options when we get to a sex scene. We have more options than you would if you're on NBC's, et cetera. But at this point, I think it's now we've had the freedom and the liberty long enough that it feels like we've gotten used to it, and it's as opposed to just running around with the new toys. Yeah, which I think it was that for a bit.
I guess in my experience, because I'm writing on a show that this is like one of the first, this is the first Latinx like queer show. We get to write sex scenes that people haven't seen before. And so it's new, so it's, anytime we're writing a sex scene with our characters, it just feels new to us, or not new to us because, obviously people in the room have experience, but new to the audience, you know what I mean? And that narrative hasn't been told before. And so I'm really glad that we've come this far. And I do feel like we can be creative because sex is like, there's so much you can do with it. There's like so many, especially now, there's like so many positions and like so many things and so many, we're writing sex with like, non-binary characters and things that you haven't really seen before. So it's a big spectrum of sex, and I'm really glad that we've come this far. So
Very cool. Very cool. Everybody good? Mm-hmm. Yay. Cool. All right, so you speak to that, which is really interesting. What is it we're trying to show about a character when we write them into a sex scene? What are we trying to tell the audience about them? How is it helping us tell character to tell that part of their life?
Well, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, our characters are really sex positive, and so there is no shame. And usually with, like, Latinas or Latinx people, there is a shame with sex, and we're trying to show that there is no shame. They enjoy it, and we're a very sex positive show. With, so I think in terms of that, like, especially like one of our characters is like, she doesn't really identify as queer, so we're kind of she doesn't like to label herself as anything, even though she likes to have sex with men and women. You kind of get a little bit insight of her character with the people she's having sex with. It's like she just enjoys sex, period. And sometimes the way sometimes it's a release for her. She has anxiety, and the way she like releases her anxiety is through having sex with certain people on the show. You know what I mean? So you get
Well, it's sex positive. That is a thing that hasn't been particularly shown. Exactly.
I feel like on that note, with Ramy, I will say that after the show came out, so many Muslims on Twitter, Muslims and non-Muslims, everyone was just like, thank you for showing someone who's human, because sex is a human thing. It's messy, people make mistakes, it happens, even if you're a practicing Muslim, non-practicing, whatever you believe in, it's a human thing that we are all in need of, which I do have to say a lot of people related to and were grateful for. So
It's also so, it's something that even your best friends, you haven't seen them doing this. So there's something about those scenes on TV that you're really getting like this little glimpse into someone's totally personal life, in the same way that you kind of like those filmic moments where someone's alone and how do they behave alone in their apartment. Just there's something so intimate and private that you really do feel like you're a fly on the wall in a way that you aren't in a lot of scenes. But also on Monogamish that I'm working on now, it's all open. It's different people opening up their marriage, and I have learned. It's funny, Dave Flabat, who I work with, he said, "You've worked with him." Yes, he's helping. He's older than me, and he said, you know, at a certain point in your life, you feel like the days just start running into each other because you're not learning anything new. He was like, the days have stopped, and I feel the same. Like we've been interviewing all these people living all these different ways, and now portraying it, and it really does make you think, like. We're trying to really show it in a way that is not voyeuristic, but that, like, what if you open your marriage, and what are the effects of this, and how are people doing it, and the relationship anarchists who are non-hierarchical, and like it's blowing my mind because I just got divorced. It's like maybe we should have just invited someone in, but it's nice to just force you to think about the things we've taken for granted. I think sex can do that just because it's new territory still.
Mm-hmm. And another thing that was coming to mind, just listening to where we are right now, that is exciting for us on Insecure. A lot of times it would be the subtle thing of just agency and empowerment, you know, and obviously not even approaching a scene with those things consciously, you know, but just at the end of the day, when you have a story that centers on these two women, these two brown women who are dating and living their lives, and when sex comes in to their lives and when they make those choices, presenting them in a way. I was thinking about the gaze is another thing that, you know, comes into play when I watch a lot of you know, sex scenes in shows and how they're shot and how, right, and just even the gaze. And so for us, even those sort of subtle but specific things about whose body are you seeing more of, you know, whose naked body are you seeing more of, and whose naked bodies are we usually seeing in television, have we seen throughout, right, the history of time. And so on our show, you tend to see more male nakedness than you do female nakedness, and, you know, just in terms of the gaze. And I think there's something that kind of speaks to, it's a more subtle version, going back to your question. For us, again, it's very story driven as far as why one of them is making the choice, you know, to have sex or be in a sexual situation. But I think it ultimately ends up hopefully feeling very led by you know, these women have agency in this situation all the time. I think that's just an end result that feels good. You know.
It is funny. People are very aware of this now. And I remember on our show, we'd been up for like a couple years, and someone just came out to me and said, "When are we going to see a penis, for God's sake?" And I was like, okay. But then I refused to just show a penis just to show a penis. So I was just like, well, it's got to make sense in the story. So we, you know, but we were keeping our eye out then. But PBS, so the gaze is something that you really do have to take into consideration, because this goes back to these old movies and how a lot of us first saw these scenes. The gaze was really, really coming from one point of view,
Absolutely.
Almost always.
Yeah.
And so it is really important to sort of flip it around and go, wait a minute, you know, and it sounds like you're doing a great job with that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I remember I was on set one time, and you know how dailies would come in digitally, and I remember getting a text from Issa. It was like, there's not enough, the guy's ass and missing from the scene, you know, just being aware of like where, you know, in that fun way of like, for us, it's like if we're going to do this scene, what are we showing? And what are we not showing? And what, you know, and balancing it out and just being like, I wasn't on set, but I'm happy, you know, I can go to, you know, and just trying to be aware of like, being conscious about it, you know, being conscious about, again, an intentional flipping sometimes, you know, is something that we go, when we're going to do those scenes, we're aware of it.
This is not a show that any of us are on, but I don't know if any of you have watched Unbelievable by any chance. But there is a really striking, there's a number of really striking moments in it, but when that the rapist is caught and put in a cell and he's forced to strip, it is really, really deeply interesting, because you don't hardly ever see men portrayed like this, and it is powerless, and he is just full on naked and he's being violated. And I remember going, wow, that is a point of view you never see. Mm-hmm. It was really, really interesting, and hats off to them for really thinking about that material carefully and going, what about, let's look at this man from a different point of view. It was interesting and shocking, actually, in a good way, I thought.
Yeah. It's that perspective. That's what's so interesting. I'm a huge Doctor Who fan, which my students know, and Russell T Davies is one of my favorite writers, and he happens to be a gay man in the UK. And when he wrote Doctor Who, then he did the spin-off Torchwood, and it was very important for him to show men dancing together and to show that lifestyle as a normal lifestyle. And he said it was because, as a child, he'd watched lots of TV and movies, and he never saw himself. And so to imagine a 10-year-old watching two very good-looking men come together and dance in public and it's acceptable was just like, I'm in charge and I can show the world what they should have seen. And it just, that power is really big, but we haven't had enough people in charge who could make those new perspectives, which I think is pretty cool. And it's very cool when it's chicks doing it.
It's probably important to note it's not just a political act, really. It's like, what do you want to see? Like, for so long, I'm sure early on, male directors are most turned on by the female body, and this is like what I think the sex scene should look like. So we get to do it and show men's asses or whatever. But it's partly for Russell too. Like, this is erotic. Why can't I show this? As opposed, it's a little of both.
Yeah, when you have the control of the
power.
Yes.
I think in this year we had to cast a limp penis, and it was just, there was a orgy. No, it was last year. There was an orgy that we were casting for, and it was the world's saddest orgy. And I remember having I didn't cast it. It was our showrunner Tanya Sriracho, but she was like, she wanted that, and it was because like she's always seen like women, in these orgies. Like if you watch Game of Thrones, there are always like these naked women, everywhere, but there's never like naked men. And it was really important that we had this like naked man in like the out, just like watching. And it was just like, yeah, we had to cast a limp dick. It was just so weird.
It's good news and bad news.
Yeah.
You got the role.
For the actor and for you.
Congratulations.
Yeah. It was just really, but you don't ever really see that. So it was just really interesting talking about female gaze, because it's nothing that we would want to see. Maybe, I don't know if I would want to see a limp, but it was definitely interesting. And then there was another scene where, in my episode, where someone got sent a dick pic. And so that was another thing that we showed and we had to cast. And it was really interesting, because like I think people shy away from like showing it, and it's just like, but they don't shy away from showing like breasts or female asses all the time on TV. But we just showed it, and we didn't make a big deal out of it. It was just like it came on screen, and it just was. So I think I don't think if a male were to run this show, would they want a dick pic shown? So I don't know. Maybe they would, but
yeah,
Smaller dick.
But that kind of stuff is that is fascinating, because we had a dick pic incident on our show as well. That we're receiving one on a screen on a phone and all that, and then all the things you have to go through with like clearance and are we implying something about this a particular act? It's a lot. It's more than one would think when she and so those kind of things are kind of fascinating, because to your point, I feel like it so much more feels like it comes up than just if you're going to have somebody flash boobs on screen. That's what's interesting. It's like, wow, there's the power, again, that comes with like, wow, this is a really big deal, and why is this such a big deal? It's just interesting.
I have to say, on just a small anecdote on 13 Reasons, which is another show I worked on. I didn't just work on Ramy. I can't talk too much about this because the season isn't out
Hasn't
yet,
aired
but
yet, right.
we had a really, really interesting discussion about teen male virginity, because it's always women and girls losing their virginity, and that's somehow the biggest story of like every teen show. But I'm sorry, I can't say too much because it'll kill me. But we had extensive conversations on how a boy should lose his virginity and what does that look like, and it's really interesting. I think a lot of times we just like pass by that and we're like, all right, they lost their virginity. But when it comes to teenagers, it is a big deal. And I think we forget that for men and young boys, I'm sure it's a huge deal. So for me, that was really interesting, just getting the perspective on the men in the room and what it was like for them to lose their virginity. And, they're like sensitive about it. So yeah, there's that conversation coming up on Netflix soon.
But see, that's fascinating because I was going to say at some point, if it ever came up, and you just brought it up, on Beverly Hills 90210, which is where I started, the first season it was a given that Jadacian Priestley character had already lost his virginity. He was a high school student, of course, he was cute, that happened. There was not a blip from the network that was part of his storyline. But when it was time for Shannon Doherty and Luke Perry to have sex, oh, the discussions about whether we could show this and how could we show this and what does it say and it's going to destroy all this. And it was like, wait, he's already lost his virginity. Why didn't we talk about that? So it's really interesting. But this brings me to the next question, which was, how should we manage, what is our responsibility in shows where teen sex might be part of the story? Do we have some kind of responsibility about how we show it, if we talk about safe sex, what we provide an audience who may be seeing it for the first time through those characters?
Just to jump off on that, I will say, well, the network, and even if you work at a streamer, they will always want you to portray safe sex when it comes to teenagers. I mean, at least on our show. So we always have to have a condom, act, whether it's like a wrapper that you see on the side or someone, tearing it with their teeth, which is actually not what you're supposed to do. So we always have to portray safe sex, which I think is important. I do personally think there is some responsibility when like millions of teens worldwide watch your show, which on 13 is like millions worldwide. It's the number 3 or 4 show on Netflix till this day. So there is a grave responsibility, I think, when it comes to that. But there's creative ways to do it, and you can have fun with it too. I don't think it's always like a PSA kind of situation, but we also have to be, I think this was really interesting. We brought in statistics on like how much sex are teens actually having in the real world. And obviously in entertainment, it's like every teenager in the world is having sex, and that's completely untrue. The statistics right now are that teens are having way less sex than they did in the 90s and early 2000s. So we have to like also grapple with that reality of like, how do kids actually live their lives? And I think unfortunately with a lot of shows on TV, it's like this is a common thing, but I remember growing up in my public school, like I didn't know anyone who was having sex. It was kind of this anomaly. So I think as adults writing for teens, we have to remember that they're not as sexually active as we think they are. And it's hard. It's hard to know what teens are actually going through. So a little bit of research and stuff.
Very cool. Cool. Anybody else on that? Had written a teen sex scene, dealt with teen sex in some way?
In my... on Vida, like she wasn't a teenager, one of our characters, but she hadn't had sex yet. And I remember getting a call from Planned Parenthood, like the studio or somebody told them Planned Parenthood to call us, and we were gonna have an abortion episode, but it just never happened. But they were very like, you have to show safe sex, you have to have the character have a condom, and it was like a really like important, like it was a big deal. But we didn't want that because we wanted her to get pregnant, and then this year I can't really say because it hasn't come out yet, but we don't actually have that episode anyway. Yeah, it was like a big deal. Like Planned Parenthood and like the studios and the networks, they want you to show safe sex. I guess it's like, I don't know if it's like a legal thing or whatever, but unless it's like gonna have like a consequence, like pregnancy or something like that, then maybe not. But yeah, if it's like somebody like young, they do want you to have that. But mine was our character was 21, so she was still young.
Yeah, that's plenty young. Cool. More thoughts or no? Did you guys on Masters of Sex ever deal with teenagers?
Yeah, they never got old enough to actually have sex themselves, but obviously we started to deal with the fact that what happens to kids when their parents are famous sex researchers and how that didn't go over so well. And the kids, the kids had to deal. We did not have them have sex though, but I think there's a great responsibility when you're showing teenagers. I think you really do have to take that very seriously. And be responsible.
Can I tell one story about a kid? Sorry, Cindy.
go ahead.
I just remembered on Ramy. So there's the 9/11 episode, and young Ramy, he masturbates for the first time, or not really. So this is a whole discussion about young kids and masturbation. Does that fall under sex? Yes.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, cool.
So this is actually really fascinating because we wrote. I think I can talk about this. We wrote the episode wanting him to masturbate for the first time, which culminates with 9/11. It's a whole thing. I know. But so our actor was 13 at the time, so he knows what masturbation is, and his dad had read the script. But this was like a whole discussion, like I think weeks and weeks of talking about how comfortable his parents would be with the scene, and legally can we show boys and girls having masturbating. Turns out you can't really, so we actually had to like change the story to him having a wet dream. So it was just like a very fine line of what you can show. There are moments where he starts to masturbate, so you see maybe a hand movement or you just have to be very creative with what you can show with young children. So that, I remember that was a huge conversation, trying to, exactly.
Well, yeah, because then you're dealing with actual actors, and that becomes very... I mean, that's the other thing about all this stuff, is that you're actually dealing with actors on a set, and that is a whole other level of ethics and behavior and monitoring that and how that works, and so it's not just what you're seeing on the screen, but how that environment is shaped and controlled behind the scenes, and that's a very, very big deal. When we started, we didn't have intimacy coordinators.
Right,
Is that
that's
what
a
they're called
relatively
now?
new, yes.
Yeah,
Comfort
we didn't have
coordinators,
that,
yeah.
so we just had to sort of learn this on the fly, and you learn very quickly if you're doing sex scenes that you have to have a very organized, regimented approach to this, otherwise things can get incredibly strange and uncomfortable, and you have to take responsibility not only for the actors in the scene, but the crew is standing there and other people are around, and you have to realize people have very big feelings about all this stuff, and we realized it got to the point where we had to approach sex scenes like you would approach a
stunt.
A stunt, yeah.
Yeah, exactly like a stunt. The set would have to have a certain, configuration. You'd have to have a meeting first. The actors would have to meet with the director separately ahead of time. And it happened because, and this happened very early on. There was a scene where Masters was with a patient, and he was watching a hooker, that's what it was. And she was getting spanked, and she had her rear in the air, and the actress, you're always supposed to wear these, covers, and always. And the actress just decided the cover was just really bugging her, and she wanted to take it off, and she did, and she took it off. And Michael Sheen was then looking at a woman on all fours right in his face, and it was weird. And she was fine, but he was not. He didn't want to look at that on set. So you realize, there's a lot of rules you have to then implement, and you have to be very, very vigilant about them. Otherwise, it can go strange.
One of my questions is, has anyone ever worked with an intimacy coordinator, and how is that helping, and all of that?
I'm amazed that it took as long as it did for that position, which is less than 5 years old, at least as far as being a really regular position on shows that I'm aware of.
So wait, I'm going to interrupt you just to say,
Sure.
Is it because now there's more naked men and they want? I don't know. Go ahead. I just thought 5 years. That's
interesting question.
It was Me Too. I think it was Me Too and
yes,
lawsuits and
yeah. I mean, it did. Absolutely. I think it did. It fell in line for sure with all of that, right? But and maybe, I guess in my mind I was feeling like that position came into play a little bit ahead of that, but maybe it didn't, ahead of really the height of Me Too, but maybe not. It may all be, but anyway, the fact that it's taken as long, because people have been, in my experience on sets, treating it like a stunt, and that part's been commonplace for a while, just in terms of the, just recognizing that it is an environment that needs to be handled with care. That's been, most professional sets, that's been in place for a while, but really realizing because it's such a heightened scenario. Even when people are all trying to be professional and all of that, it's just a heightened scenario that deserves to be treated with even more respect. And so, yes, what's also fascinating, I remember there was actually the first time that we had an intimacy coordinator sort of starting to come on board on Insecure. Also those moments where it's, again, going back to the stuff that we can all bring to this process. So it's also great to have somebody who comes in and can treat this with kind of a detachment, with a healthy detachment. Because as you were saying, Michelle, there's big feelings around it, but when someone really can come in and treat it like, okay, this is what we're doing in the scene, how do we want to coordinate it, blah, blah, blah. I just remember there was actually a meeting, I think I was on set and some other producers were having a meeting with an intimacy coordinator, and everyone just came out looking kind you know what I mean? There were a couple of us that were shooting on the scene. We were like, what's happening? You're all okay? And they were like, we just had the first, there was going to be a threesome. There was going to be some type of scene that had complicated maneuvers, and there was going to be a lot of montage intercutting. And, somebody who can just sit down and be like, okay, so what are we doing? Are you face sitting here? Are we doing this? And you want to intercut this way? You da da da. Someone who's just like, but it's also helpful to have that as well. The protection and the extra comfort for the actors is helpful, but somebody who can sort of come in and be that, and be
like, remember, it's a professional assignment
yeah.
as opposed to we're trying to
that objectivity I think is also helpful. So anyway, it's been I'm amazed it's taken this long, and I think is a real value add is my long and short.
It just
of it.
protects everyone.
It does.
Yeah, I wasn't on set for Vida season 3, but I believe they did have an intimacy coordinator, I think for this show it was particularly safe. But like I've been on shows where it would have been very helpful to have, but this was over 10 years ago.
I still haven't seen one on set till this day. I don't know if it's because, at 13, it's season 4, everyone's comfortable with each other, but I think it's still helpful. I mean, we have new characters, we have new cast members. So I was actually really surprised not to see one on set.
On Sex and the City, a lot of times that sex scene was the first thing that they would film for a guest star. There were a ton of guest stars.
Wow.
And it was told to me that it was because, in case the actress and they didn't get along that well, at least, you got that out of the way, and then it appeared they were enjoying
And then they did get along well.
But it was probably terrible for these guest stars because they're just thrown into bed, as soon as on their first day. So, yeah, we didn't have anything like that.
Wow. Amazing. All right, well, I got the flag that we should start Q&Aing, and before we have the audience do that, I have one question for everybody to finish, so no one in the audience has to waste time asking it. You can ask something more specific, and that is always the brief origin story. How did you come to be a writer in Hollywood? So everyone can get that story and then move on to more specific questions. So, who wants to give us our quick?
I'll start. I started in 2002. I got into the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences internship program. Originally from San Francisco, went to SF State, and basically got an internship on a show and was in the writer's room. And I was like, I didn't know if I wanted to be a TV writer because it wasn't I just wanted to be a screenwriter. And they put me on the show called The District on CBS. And then from then I was like, okay, I really want to do this. I love the collaborative process. And I got a PA job on the show, and then I did another CBS show called Cold Case for 3 years, and then I worked on so many shows, guys. As a writer's assistant, script coordinator. So that's how I got my start. And then I got my first break. I was a script coordinator on Sons of Anarchy, and I got my first staff writing gig that way. And then from then on, I just kept on going up. But it was through the internship program.
Cool, thanks.
Should we go down the line?
Sure, why not?
Okay. So I also started as a writer's assistant, which I think is a super valuable, wonderful way to learn and kind of, just be in the trenches and get to see how story and shows are created. I was a writer's assistant on the show Any Day Now on Lifetime, and then got my first freelance on that show, and then ended up on staff on the show the final season. And then continue, I've been really fortunate too in terms of mentors and just amazing women that I've worked with, many of whom started, on that show, or that I should say that I met on that show. So went on to work on things like Lincoln Heights, which Kathleen McGee-Anderson, whom I met on Any Day Now, worked with her on that, and on Soul Food, and worked on Veronica Mars, and just, so really for me, doing that whole apprentice environment as a writer's assistant was invaluable. You know, coming out of, I went to USC and film school and did all that stuff, but it really was like graduate school for me was kind of the writer's assistant track and doing all that. And then, yeah, working my way up, etc.
Cool.
I have a weird journey. I started at YouTube Space LA, which is like a production studio for YouTube creators. And I was a production coordinator, and basically my job was to like help YouTubers make videos, which was a nightmare. And I studied film in undergrad, so I had like a production background, and I just thought like that's all you do, like you produce. Like I didn't think you could write. I don't know why. I also had like no visibility to anyone higher than like a line producer, so I just didn't know what those jobs were. I just thought like TV happens. I don't know. I was very dumb. But also no, I mean like in your film programs in undergrad, I don't know if you don't go to USC or UCLA, honestly like some of these programs don't teach you anything. So I just didn't know. But thankfully YouTube started YouTube Originals, thankfully for me, and I jumped on as a scripted coordinator. So my job was to read scripts all the time and help, you know, the executives develop the shows. I worked under someone really amazing, Suzanne Daniels. She was the head of Warner Brothers. She like greenlit Gilmore Girls, which I was like, oh my God, favorite show of all time. And I just learned of the business under these amazing executives. John Wax, who worked at WGN, Dustin Davis. Anyways, so I would read scripts and I'd be like, these are terrible. Like, who writes these and why do these shows get made? And basically it was because they were white men. And so I was like, all right, if I don't find some story that, you know, relates to me, you know, I'm just going to do it myself. Like, if these people can write, I can write. So I actually went to MFA. I went to Stephens College and got my MFA in screenwriting just because I wanted a more academic understanding of writing, and that kind of helped me get a bunch of pilots under my belt. One of the pilots is the pilot that I used to get on Ramy. And Ramy, I peripherally knew because there's like 5 Muslims in Hollywood, so we all know each other. There's more now, but we know each other. And my connection was through working at YouTube. I knew all the agents, I knew all the managers because they would send their materials to me, and I'd be the little minion like tracking everything. So actually, I found my agent, Danny. He's here, but you know, he's my friend too. It's okay. He's an agent, but he's my friend. And you know, I was like, hey, can you read this script and tell me if it's good? Like, I really want to go up for this show. And he was one of the first persons who were like, let's do it. Let's get you staffed. But I went on Ramy as a writer's assistant and script coordinator because they thought I could do both. Sure. Did that job, got an episode. Yeah, and then, you know, after that, you know, I just feel like it was a really good time to be a writer. It's a really good time to be a writer of color because everyone's just like, where are your stories? Like, good and bad. But, you know, got other jobs through that. And then 13 Reasons was really like the first staff writing job I got this past year. And yeah, I'm still baby writer, so
We like writers of all levels on these panels. We want all the stories.
Thank you for having me.
Cool.
I want to go fast because I want to get to your questions, but so I always knew I wanted to be a writer. I grew up in Oklahoma. I knew no one in the business. I went to journalism school at Northwestern thinking like I'll be a journalist. I was not good at that, and so I, oh my God, I was like, I'll make this quick. And okay, so I was born. The short was like I wrote an essay. I moved to New York. I wrote an essay that got published in a magazine. Because I studied journalism, but it was like just a column that spoke to me. It was in this New York magazine, and that piece was kind of this flare that went up that this friend of ours, Wendy Goldman, saw and like told me to think about sitcom writing, and then I went to like UCLA Extension and met the teacher who became my writing partner for a while. But I kind of always wrote these little essays on the side, and I'm a big proponent of you know, put out your own stuff and have the goods when the job comes. And so I worked my way up shitty shows till I finally got on some decent shows. But those essays, I wrote like one a year about dating. And when Sex and the City finally came around, I kind of had this stuff.
And I still do that. Sell, and you had the background to sell it. Yeah. Cool.
I did it. I was a page at KTLA. I was seating audiences. I was a runner. I was a PA. I was a receptionist. I was at every crap job imaginable, and I finally ended up And all I did was latch on to people in my environment that just looked like they were doing something interesting. I had no idea about being a writer. I actually thought I wanted to be a cameraman. It's just, if that shows you how completely out to lunch I was. But I would just latch on to somebody, anybody in my eyesight that was doing something interesting. And I would just say, in your next job, can I come with you? And they would go, oh, all right. And so I eventually ended up as the assistant to somebody running a show, and I got to sit in a writer's room, and that's when it clicked. And I went, oh, okay, so this is where it happens. This is it. And so, but then I had no idea if I could write. So then I had to quit that job, because those jobs are hard. You have no time. And I had to quit that job and then try to write, and it ended up working. But yeah, it was just, if throwing yourself into the workplace is a really good way to figure out what is going on and where you fit and where you don't fit.
Perfect. All right, so now it's up to you guys. Who's got a hand? They'll bring you a microphone. We'll start back there. The gentleman in the denim shirt there.
Hi, I was curious with where you are in your careers now, being able to comfortably talk about this on a panel, but going backwards now, since I'm currently in the Stephens program, of whether your script that you submit to get interviewed with an agent or for a room, of the comfortability of talking about sex while being interviewed for a show. I was just curious how that's gone, or advice or thoughts.
Good question.
I've always been a bit of an open book, and I feel like that's partly why I get hired for the shows I get hired for. I'm like really comfortable talking about it, and it's the best part about being divorced. Like, I have stories again. I'm out. I'm researching again. But I think it's important, whether it's sex or not. I think it's really important to be comfortable sharing your personal stories so that they get a sense of like what you're going to bring to the room that nobody else could bring to the room. So if you can figure out what are your funny stories or your funny perspectives, and the more personal, sometimes just something personal, and sex is one of the more personal, shows them that you're not afraid to like sort of put it out there and see the humor in your own situation, I guess.
And I completely agree. The only thing I was going to add too is in terms of writing a sample, kind of speaking to what we've been talking about up here, just making that it comes, that if there's sex in your script and all that, just that things are character-driven, story-driven, justified, versus kind of chasing something that's would be flashy, or this is going to grab people, or this is going to be titillating. So I think if a story that you've written or a sample that you've written is coming from that space, and then whatever. Sorry about this feedback. And then bringing that same authenticity, hopefully, into a meeting.
Cool. All right. Who's up? Yeah, so many people. Right up front here.
So I have a question. I'm stuck on this scene in my script where two high school kids, they're both males, and they're about to have sex, and they're both virgins. And I was trying to how would I convey that in words without saying they are nervous? How else would I convey that they are nervous and scared at before they're about to have sex?
You mean in the stage direction or in dialogue?
In dialogue.
Cool.
I mean, I think you just can say it yeah, without being on the nose and saying I'm nervous. There's, just say, I mean, I don't have the exact words right now.
No,
but I think you just can go out and say it.
I could just say it
how
they're feeling.
Well, I think you have to. This is where you have to look at behavior and think when people are nervous, how do they express that in a way? What would they, if they don't want to say they're nervous, but they are nervous? People do all sorts of curious things, and that's where you have to look at behavior, which becomes then character, this is how people express themselves when they're nervous. And so it's about being very specific about who those two boys are and what might come out of their mouths when they are in a very nervous situation.
Yeah, that answered my question.
I'm guessing you want Cindy's advice to be funny.
Well, I would talk to friends. I mean, I always totally elicit my friends. I would talk to my gay friends and be like, "Do you remember your first time? And did you talk at all, or were you nervous to talk at all?" And even though there's only a couple people, I think it helps to talk to some people and get a sense of how it was for. And it's the same whether they're gay or straight, or you talk to your female friends.
Cool. All right. Some more hands. Who's got way in the back in the yellow jacket?
Hi, I'm actually one of 6 or 7 intimacy coordinators in LA right now.
How cool.
So that last question really kind of hit, and I was a little nervous about what you were all going to say. But I was actually on Insecure this past season, and I work with Risa Brayman Garcia, and I'm good friends with Catherine, who's on Vida. So we're a really small community right now. And I did want to clarify that the person that you were talking about on Insecure was actually a sex choreographer, which we had for a long
different
time.
roles.
Yeah, we had that for a long time before we had intimacy coordinators. But you were correct. There was a sort of movement of intimacy coordination starting before the Weinstein story broke.
I thought so.
Cool.
And there were intimacy directors, which are what they're called in theater, for probably 15 or 20 years before that. They are now required at HBO, which is why Insecure got one this season,
Right.
and also why you're not seeing them on other shows, because HBO is still the only network that requires an intimacy coordinator on a closed set.
I'm so glad I called on you.
That's why I wore yellow. But my question for you was because what I'm seeing a lot in scripts is, and then they fuck, or like, then it goes down, and there's just not like what you're all talking about sounds amazing and sounds like it gives just as much attention to the movement dialogue of a sex scene that you would to the verbal dialogue of any other scene. And what I'm like still really struggling with is getting directors and writers and really everyone across the board to like think as deeply about their sex scenes. So I'm wondering how you see this kind of crossover or how integrating intimacy coordinators into productions, how you can see, like if you can sort of predict a little bit how we could work better together to get more people thinking this way about sex scenes. It just takes a lot to get people to, the giggling is one thing, but like really treating it with as much care is it's rare. So.
Oh, cool. That's an excellent question.
I think, I mean, I don't have a ton of experience with this, but I will say, like, I feel like we bring experts into the writer's room all the time on every subject from, everything. I mean, I worked on a show about suicide, but like, why not bring experts on sex? Like, if that's a part of your show, or even if it's not a huge part of your show. But I think so many writers are told just to, like, at least in my rooms, they were just like, oh, don't worry about that. We'll coordinate with a director, because they're going to have a vision for this scene. So just don't write, just write they fuck, like literally, because no one wants to deal with it, because they're just like, it's going to change anyway on set. We're gonna figure it out with a director.
But if you write it, it won't change on set, because you'll tell the director what to do, and they'll have to do that.
Exactly. And the gays that we're talking about, like, usually men are directors, usually on most TV shows. So I think it's so important to write the specificity of what you're trying to see in a scene. But I've been told by showrunners, like, don't even worry about that, because we're going to coordinate it later.
No, and Gladys, but you were speaking to actually giving more direction to yours.
Yeah, our sex scenes are very choreographed. Like, we write everything. And I think if you guys ever get a chance to read Vida scripts, you'll see, like, we are very detailed about, like, every little position, every intention, everything. And so I think when we do get to set, everything's there, you know what I mean? And so sometimes we do have to pull back because of time or whatever, but we're
really
very, very detailed.
Comforting to the actors too, I'm sure, to like, because then they're not just left to try to,
Yeah,
improv.
exactly. I think they know going in, like, they don't have to make shit up. Like, it's already on the page, and it's discussed beforehand, and we make sure that before we shoot anything, they're all really comfortable. Everyone is on the same page. And yeah, it's a really important thing on our show, that because sex is so heavy on our show, like we focus on it a lot. It's like an important thing that we get it right, And so I don't know. You said Catherine is our I think if you guys ever read it, and there's copies in the library here.
Yay! Library, yay.
All of our sex scenes are very, like, intentional.
And what I was thinking about, how cool that is, and how, to your point, how rare that is. I do think I do think there's maybe a bit of a shift hopefully happening in terms of again, be at least approaching sex scenes with more thoughtfulness and more, whatever you want to call that, right? More conscious intention, even when it's not as, I mean, because it's such a theme and such a, part of, it's baked into the show on Vida, but even with romantic comedies or romantic dramedies or whatever the case may be, hopefully we're moving to a place where, for us it's like just being so intentional about why is this scene happening? What's the story and the character purpose for this scene? And not wanting to be at least somewhat specific, even if it's not super choreographed. And yeah, there'll be meetings with the director to sort of work out some things, but at least I think there's a movement, but it does need to grow and expand and continue, a movement toward being a little bit more thoughtful and intentional about why this scene is here, and how should it be executed from a story. And as we know, it's got to start from a story place and not just be ideally left to like meh.
Yeah. I was exaggerating with that meh, but it is sometimes it's a lot of like we'll figure it out later, and with a lot of other things too, not just sex, but like I had a huge like stunt scene, and they're like, don't even write it, we'll just figure it out with like a stunt coordinator.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Cool. All right. Who's up for another one? Who's got a question? A few bodies over way in the corner there. We haven't gone back there. Yep, they got a microphone coming.
I wanted to ask, it's an all female panel, which is great. But in light of Me Too and all these changes in the industries, like, do you think that more of there's a lot of directors are men? Do you think that there's been a lot more thought put into having more of a female gaze in film in general, not just from women like filmmakers and writers, but also from men who are behind the scenes?
I think it takes one of the things I noticed working with this kind of material for a long time, it takes someone to really step outside themselves in a sort of extraordinary way. You're not going to find a lot of men that immediately go, let me really look at this from the woman's point of view. People are their own sort of funnel for information and how they process it and how they look at it. And so I think it's great to, when you're working with men, say, hey, what about this? Or did you think of this? Or look at it this way. But to become angry when they don't immediately do that is, I think everyone, you're only your own filter. Your whole experience of everything has come only through you. So I learned to be a little bit generous when I would find attitudes that I felt sort of maybe not very enlightened, and say, hey, this is an opportunity to talk to you about this, rather than going, you're an asshole, which didn't help matters. And it also just sort of, we're in a complicated time, and I think it's a great time to talk and try and share with people, rather than trying to crush them with judgment.
Yeah, I feel like I think there's so many more. There's a lot of female protagonists. There's a lot of female showrunners. The staffs are getting more balanced. I directed my first episode of television last year on I'm Dying Up Here. It's the first time I asked in like 20-something years of TV writing, and I feel like because right now, I think I didn't have it on. Sorry, because the doors open. Like there is a lot of pressure from the top. For each show to hire more female directors. Because of that, I could feel myself as it came up on the second season where I was supposed to do one, wanting to say like, it's okay if it's awkward or whatever. I don't. But there was finally people kind of like pushing you through the door as opposed to blocking the door. So I feel like that's happening more and more. There's actually like a push to find. So I think rather than try to expect men to see it through our eyes, just like helping to have a more balanced crew and people at all levels and the show perspective to make it happen.
Cool. All right. Up front. Bring a microphone.
Do you recall a transformative sex scene in a foreign film that impacted you?
Oh yes, one of the very first scenes I ever saw, and I was way too young, was Last Tango in Paris, and yes, that left an enormous, not positive effect. I was too young to understand what that was. I just knew it seemed very violent and strange, and yes, I do remember that.
I just watched A Fantastic Woman last night, and it was awesome. Like I really, and I loved the way they portrayed this transgender woman and this cis man having a normal relationship, and they have, you know, sex, and it's not, they're not like, you know, making a big deal about her transgenderism, you know, like at all. It was just a beautiful sex scene. And I thought it was really well done. And this was through a male perspective because a male directed it. So I just commend them for doing a great job on that. I hadn't seen it before, but.
Yeah, same Pedro Almodovar. I always love his films, and he does women better than most women, I think. What was the one? It wasn't All About My Mother, I think, where that had the giant vagina, the woman in a coma. I mean, Talk to her, and like he got away with and just did some crazy, risky things, and it's all through love and kind of just beautiful. I just like the humanity that he infused it with.
Cool. All right. Other questions? Way in the back.
Hi. Question. What do you do when you have an actor that maybe isn't comfortable with the sex scene? Like they may say they are to get the gig, and then they get on set and it's like, oh, I don't know. I mean, and maybe that's more, you know, I don't know, that may be more of a director's question than a writer's question, but I am curious. And by the way, I am a director, so if anybody up here is looking for a woman director, please call me. Thank you.
Well, and in TV, writers are producers, so they would have to deal with an actor having an issue, yes.
That can happen. I mean, certainly with our policy, you can never, ever force anybody to do anything. So if that happens, then you just say, well, this didn't work out, and you know, but you can either say this is what the scene requires, and if you can't do it, then maybe we'll find some other role for you down the road. But what we actually tried to do is, if someone was deeply uncomfortable with something, we would try and work with it and say, well, what are you okay with? How does, you know, and try. I mean, it seemed really in the spirit of things to be sensitive to how people felt. I mean, it was always on the page. We never wrote they fuck ever. It was so an actor had a good idea of what they were getting into. But even then, if they get on it's a perfect example of a just say no moment. You may think they may think they want to do it, and then they get there and they don't want to do it, and then that is completely, to me, that's their decision, and that should be honored.
I was on a show where I think the actress lied about being comfortable with nudity, and then it came to a scene where she had to be nude, and she just was not comfortable with it, and so we had to like creatively come up with a like way to show but not show. So it was like, I think it was like she was having sex, but I don't know. I remember like either she had her boyfriend's t-shirt on or something like that, but it was like really uncomfortable for everybody, and it was just like, well, we hired you because we thought you were going to be comfortable with it, and it ended up, I think she had lied about it, and just to get the job, and it sucked for everybody. Yeah.
But you are making me think of, I think the question is making me think too of those, you know how we talk about it in other situations where if you lose a location or something happens and you kind of have to go, well, this is where we are and this is the situation we're in, how are we going to make this work? And so I've been in situations too where whether it's like the scenario, the choreographed scenario that everybody had in mind. It may be, sometimes an actor may really get in the moment and actually ahead of the moment think like, okay, I read this, okay, sure, I'm on board. Now that I'm here in this moment, don't feel so on board. You know, sometimes it really is just real. And so even whether it's that sometimes someone was trying to get a job, or sometimes someone just gets in that moment and is like, now I'm freaking out, and I wasn't before and I am now. It's also, I've learned a lot from directors who are able to, you know, and we're working in partnership on set, and we're able to just kind of go, well, got to do something different. How, you know, what are we going to do now? And it is that spirit of you know, there's sometimes cool things can come out of that. And so I try, you know, it's a trial and error, but you try to stay in that mindset of like, you can figure something out, you know, when you have to, and being open to that. Because you know, again, sometimes it's like if you can get past the like, this is frustrating because we thought we were going to be doing A and now we're not, and then like being able to be open to like, okay, so we lost that location. What are we doing now? You know, so to speak.
We had on I'm Dying Up Here, the episode I did, we had a very comic actor who had done all comedy, and it was her first like sex scene, and she was just really nervous about that. So there's sometimes just that of like, you know, your first time trying to play real and romantic, and so yeah, I think it's just making people comfortable. But I do like how you sometimes come up with something better because of the obstacles people throw at you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you have to really be in tune with the people on set. Like, I think it's so important to have a female producer, writer,
Yes.
whatever it is on set, because we had a incident where one of our actresses was like, you know, she's always very comfortable doing stuff, very open to it, but at some point she's like, I'm just tired of kissing boys. Like, I'm tired of this. And she had like a little bit of, you know, a moment on set, and I totally felt for her. And it was a reality check for the writers, because we kept writing her in situations where she, you know, is kissing a boy, but she's like getting information from him. And yes, it felt important to the story, but at the same time, you have to really listen to your actors who are like, I'm tired of doing this, you know, let's try something different. And it really makes you think about, okay, you know, subconsciously, none of us did it on purpose. We were just, you know, we realized like, she's right. We've had like 5 episodes where she's just making out with boys. So women in the room, like, speak up, you know, and even the women, we just sort of glazed over it, unfortunately, and that happens sometimes.
That's very true.
Very much agree about a woman producer on set for those scenes, because even sometimes whether the director is male or female, a director can be in the moment of like, I need to get this shot I need to get. And so somebody who can just be there, you know, and especially because there isn't always an intimacy coordinator there, someone who can be there to really, I'm here to like look out for the actors in this moment and make sure everybody is cool is helpful.
I'm telling you, this time has flown by. I got that little rap sign that said we need to say thanks to everybody. Now I'm told that before we have everyone, let's come and say hi to everybody, but we're supposed to do a little picture of the panel, and then everyone can come up and say hi to everybody. So we're gonna thank everybody for coming in tonight, talking about something so sensitive. Yay! We'll stand up picture under the Writers Guild thing, and then when the picture's done, y'all are welcome to come up and say hi and shake folks' hands and say thank you so much for showing up.